じゃあ、ラウンド始めます。チェアの方お願いします。すいません。
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. Please put your POIs in the chat. I'll try to take one from CEO. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, some setup. How is the government going to do this and give the pill? Firstly, it's going to be free to everyone. Secondly, it will be free for everyone, even after childhood, so anyone can access it. Thirdly, it's going to be very accessible. It's going to be built. Dispensaries are going to be built places in like poor or rural communities, so everyone can access it. Thirdly, there'll be total transparency on the effect of the pill, like medical info, how it's going to affect people and stuff like that. What is likely to happen? Firstly, I think parents who give the pill want to give the pill constantly instead of intermittently. Why is this true? A, because they don't want withdrawal effects. Often pills have withdrawal effects, therefore they don't want this. But secondly, B, children can get used to the effects of the pill, so they can get used to living as with the effects of the pill rather than like fucking up their system and having to have these withdrawal effects. Thirdly, C, they likely want the good effects of the pill to last. Will give you many benefits that the parents are likely to be incentivized by. Therefore, they're likely to give this pill every day. Secondly, why is it going to be used carefully instead of like used in a bad way? A, it is likely to be a new pill. There's likely to be discussions around the effectiveness of the safety, and therefore, I think it's likely that parents are going to opt into to this discussion and try to understand the pill. But B, parents care for their children. They don't want bad things to happen to the children. They're likely to research before they give this new pill to their children. C, many people are likely to use the pill. If there are problems, it's likely to be shared on social media and discussed overall. Therefore, there's a lot of information on the internet. Also, the government is giving a lot of information on the internet. And lastly, so I think overall, the parents are likely care for their children. They likely are suspicious of a new pill that is being developed, and they likely want the best for the children. Therefore, likely to research a lot. Lastly, how is it going to be administered? Firstly, parents likely explain to the children what is happening, that they're giving their pill to them in the first place, and what are the effects or why they're doing it in the first place. But secondly, parents likely to try other methods to stop behavioral problems that currently exist. Like, we believe this is going to be a last resort for the most troubled children. Why is this true? A, because there's likely to be already data on the effectiveness of different education programs that the children can opt into. Therefore, rather than this new pill that is not clear what the effectiveness is, therefore they're likely to opt into other better forms beforehand. But B, it is less risky than a new pill that they don't really understand about. Therefore, they're likely going to try other methods, and if it doesn't work, this is going to be their last resort. I'll take the clarification now.
So the assumption here is that the pill is really mass produced and very cheap to access, right?
Yeah. Okay. Firstly, benefits for the children and parents. Firstly, what happens on opposition side? We believe children who have extreme behavioral problems are likely to have problems assimilating into society. A, in terms of education, they likely cannot sit still. They likely cannot sit and study. They likely to be very disobedient in class, which does not allow them to be educated in the first place. So B, they likely get a criminal record. They cannot follow the law. They're likely to steal like things from the convenience store and likely be arrested. They have a criminal record. But C, they likely hurt their physical body. As in all the examples, they likely to take drugs and alcohol, and they're likely to like destroy their body in the long term. They probably don't live as long as they could. I think, note, this is likely to be used on children who have extreme behavioral problems, as I set up, that could not be changed in other ways, the other effective ways that currently exist. Therefore, they're likely to be children who don't have any other option. They're likely to be children who are very, very troubled. Therefore, we think the impacts here are very large. Why is it likely that children on our side take the pill and do not reject it? Firstly, they likely want to stop the problems themselves. They probably want to stop it. They probably want to get out of this cycle of taking drugs and drinking alcohol, or always being like reprimanded by the police or the teachers. They probably can't find other ways. They probably can't opt out of it on their own. Why is this true? A, because they are probably impulsive, right? They're children. They probably don't have the mechanisms to control themselves, the understanding of their bodies and how they react in order to set a plan and actually fix their behavioral problems. B, probably it's structurally really hard because people around them probably also steal or smoke, and their friends might steal and smoke and stuff like that. So it's really hard for them to change their behavior. But secondly, they likely want better child-parent relationships. They probably want to make their parents proud. This is the first person that they are exposed to. This is the person who probably want to have good relationships. They probably support them emotionally and financially. Therefore, they probably want better child relationships. The implication here is that children probably want to fix their behavioral problems. They currently cannot. They want better child relationships. They currently do not, and they're unlikely to reject the pill when it is offered to them. On government side, why does it actually get better? What are the benefits of taking the pill? Firstly, they can easily assimilate into society, stop all the things that I explained. For example, they get better education, no criminal record. They save their body because now they can assimilate it easily. Why is this important? Firstly, in terms of like long term, I think these harms I explained are very long term. For example, not being able to access education probably means you don't get a good job. It probably means you can't self-actualize and have a lot of options to choose from when you want to do something. You probably live less, which is a very long-term harm. So therefore, I think it's important. But there's also other benefits other than to children. In terms of parents, they likely spend less money on paying for the fines that their child get, or they likely can spend more time with their child. They likely don't have to scold their children and take a lot of time to do so. Therefore, it saves a lot of money and time for the parents as well. But thirdly, I think there's better living standards for both child and parent when they're not constantly getting tickets, or when they don't have to pay for that when the child stops stealing money from the parents or doing all of these bad things that likely cost money. But lastly, there's probably better parent-child relationships. They probably spend less time arguing. They spend more time discussing what they did that day, which is likely to be beneficial for the emotional health of both the parent and the child. So overall, we think there's a lot of benefits. What is the okay? So the second thing I'm going to talk about is why is this? I think opposition might say that this is going to lead to worse parent-child relationship in the future after they're off the pill, because the child might say why did you do this and stuff like that. Firstly, when you're an adult, you probably can understand the situation that your parent is in and be very empathetic to the choices your parent made. If it is true that the child was forced, even best case of child is forced to take the pill, we think that when they're older, they understand the complexities of child raising. They likely understand how their parents didn't have enough money to send them to the behavioral counseling and stuff like that. So they had to opt into taking the pill. They likely can have empathy for their parents and understand, therefore, they keep good child-parent relationships. So secondly, even when you are on the pills, I think the parents are likely to tell you that these behaviors are bad, that there is a necessity for you to fix them. They likely calculate the risks of backlash in the future of having their child cut off the relationship in the future when they if they don't explain at all. Therefore, they're likely to constantly communicate with the child and tell them what are the reasons they're doing this, why this is actually better for them, and the child's benefit is the most important thing for them. Therefore, I think it's unlikely that the parent-child relationship is worse off in the future. Very proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I'll go on the later position. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Great. For the points, please put it in the chat. Not the Discord chat, but Zoom chat. Do not vocalize your point, please. People will be annoyed. And also, he can pronounce. I'll try to take around 5. Hopefully, from the closing, Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 things. Firstly, how in our side of the house this one drug is going to be used. But secondly, the problem that happens in their side of the house, the long-term problem that is going to happen on the children. But lastly, about how our side is going to be better off for these one children. But before that, let me just independently kick out the opening government and closing opposition. Firstly, opening government came this room late. I think it's shame. So they lose out this debate. But also closing up, they are drunk. In that situation, we think that they are already out of the debate because it is not polite action. Okay, moving on. Firstly, how in our side of the house this one drug is going to be used, right? We think that in our side of the house, if the children consent to taking drugs, we think that we are happy to let the children do take the drugs in the first place, right? For example, in that situation, we think that, for example, Lisa's case about that, for example, the alcoholic addict children who really want to opt out from this kind of alcoholic addict, we think that these kind of children do want to take the drug, right? In that situation, we think that we can say that these kind of children do consent to having these kind of drugs in the first place, and therefore we're not happy to give this kind of drug to this kind of individual. How we are going to assure this kind of consent, right? We think that in our side of the house, when these kind of doctors give these kind of drugs, we force both parents and children to come to the hospital, and we are going to conduct this kind of like interview between like doctors and children, like excluding these kind of parents. So one by one, we are going to like conduct this one by one interviews between the doctors and doctors and children. And when the doctors can show these kind of like children really want to have the drugs, we are more than happy to use these kind of drugs in the first place. Right? In that situation, we think that in our side of the house, we think that a certain extent of these kind of like consent is going to be is going to happen in our side of the house. But even if there are really certain cases that like parents are so abusive and parents punch the children before they send their children to the hospital. They send their children to the interview and they brainwash children to take the drugs, then presumably we think that these kinds of like really addictive, abusive parent cases is not going to be mutually exclusive. And therefore we think that in our side of the house, at least in majority of the cases, we think that the consent is going to be approved. And therefore we think that our side is much more better. Then moving on to the problem that happens in their side of the house. We think that in their side of the house, firstly, we think that the parents are going to blanketly use this kind of pill, right? Because this is a really easy way for them to deal with implied children in the first place, right? Because dealing with implied children costs a lot. You have to talk to them, you have to like listen to them, and you have to take time or whatever. And in that situation, we think that in their side of the house, we think that the parents are going to use this kind of use this kind of like pill easily in the first place. But secondly, we think that in their side of the house, especially in cases where children do not consent to the consumption of the drug, we think that these kind of children is going to be fucked up in the long run in the future. But before moving on, yes, I'll take some detail.
I think I gave you many mechanisms why parents are unlikely to misuse a drug. Firstly, in terms of just that the pill is new, or secondly, just the fact that parents care about children. Can you weigh your arguments and mechanism against ours?
Okay, but you never explain why in the case that why we have to like why we have to like to use this drug when children are not consenting, especially using your example in the first place, right? But secondly, right, as we already said, right, we think that the children do not consent to the usage of the drug. In cases where children do not consent, we think that these kind of children are not going to use drugs after they get adults in the first place, right? Because why? Because what we have to notice here is why these kind of children do not consent on this kind of drug, right? This is precisely because A, we think the children themselves do not understand the benefit of using this one, like the benefit of using drugs and benefit of being polite in the first place. But B, we think that for these kind of children, this kind of implied action is really attractive, right? In that situation, we think that in these kind of cases is where this kind of consent is not going to happen, right? In this kind of in that situation, we think that these kind of children is not going to take drugs after they become like older than 18 years old, because A, we think they no longer have to be forced to take the pill in the first place, right? Maybe in some cases they feel that they're freed from these kind of like parents like binding in the first place, and therefore they have no incentive to take the pill in the first place. And also maybe in some cases we think that taking the pill in and of itself has become the traumatic experience for this kind of individual, and therefore maybe they hesitate to take the pills in the first place, right? But B, we think that maybe the government is going to say that maybe children initially don't consent. Children is going to gradually consent. We think that this is not going to be really important because this kind of consent in their side of the house is done while these kind of children are taking like polite pill, because in their side of the house, like Lisa already told you that this kind of drug is going to be taken like constantly, right? In that situation, even if children under a polite pill consent on taking this continuous drug, we think that at the moment that this kind of like drug is deceased, the effect of the drug is finished, we think that they have no incentive to continue that consent that they made in the first place. But lastly, we think that they have the incentive to rebel against the parents in the first place. The example is the reason that I'm addicted to like smartphone and TikToks and whatever is precisely because my mother didn't buy me like DS or whatever, right? In that situation, we think that this kind of like feeling of rebellion is going to happen, and in that situation, we think that when they become adults, we think that they're going to be fucked up, and in that situation, majority of the harm is going to happen in their side of the house. That they explain it's going to happen in their side of the house. More worse, because they are adults, they have more capacity to do bad things, right? Because if they are children, we think that even if they want to like buy alcohol, the amount of the alcohol that they can buy is limited, right? Because they don't have that much money in the first place. But when they become adults, they can buy as much as alcohol that they want in the first place. And in that situation, the harm of the implied action that happens in their side of the house is much more worse in their side of the house. Then, how in our side of the house we can be better? The premise here is the parents do have the incentive to make children behave because A, they love children, but B, we think that the children implied action harms parents themselves because of the reputation effect or because of the financial damage, like maybe the compensation of the children fucking up or whatever, right? In that situation, we think that in our side of the house, like children is going to be better off in long term because of three different reasons. Two layers. One, we think that in our side of the house, parents will try to convince children to take that drug beforehand, right? Parents is going to tell why this kind of polite action is really good, why this kind of like polite action is going to make your it's going to brighten your future in the first place, right? In that situation, we think that in our side of the house, because in our side of the house we can get this kind of drug only under the consent, we think that in our side of the house, these kind of children are going to take drugs under the consent, and therefore when they make consent to this kind of drug, we think that they have the likelihood of them continuing to take the drugs, even if they become adults, is likely in the first place, right? In that situation, we think that our side is much more better because we get the pro-consent. But secondly, even if we are talking about the worst case scenario that children fucked up, we think that when children are fucked up, they're going to be sent in the special like institution, for example, like shonen, like juvenile, like prison, or this kind of or some kind of medical institution that deal with a drug addict or whatever. And in that situation, even if the parents doesn't have the capacity, we think that people in that institution do have the capacity to deal with these fucked up children in the first place, and therefore our side is much more better. By all of these reasons, we think that in long term we are more happy. We think that our side is much more better.
Thank you very much, co-founder DLO, DPM, 谢谢。
I'll take POIs in chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, in terms of misuse or the fact that people are going to blanketly use this, I think Lisa preempted this in multiple ways. We think that this is not true that parents can easily rely on this pill because there's still likely to be a higher barrier to entry. The fact that you might feel bad for using this pill, that you're forcing your children to have this, or that there might be rejections from your grandparents that aren't used to this pill, especially when your children is not consenting, or the fact that there's research papers that scientifically analyze how children behave after this, or the fact that parents simply have to think whether or not to have children in the first place, and therefore they're more likely to actually care about their well-being. What OO said is that on their side, uniquely, parents will try to talk to children and actually convince them of taking this pill. But all of this framing already proves to you that this already has happened, that the fact that you have to force this pill on these children is likely to be something as a last resort, that you try to talk about why you have to change these behaviors or how it's going to benefit you. However, it didn't work, and therefore you're having this pill. And therefore we think that this benefit that they're uniquely trying to claim on their side doesn't exist. Second thing that they say is that they can simply allow children to consent, and they're only going to use this when they consent. We think that this severely marginalizes the benefits that you get from these pills, because even if even if an action or this pill benefits the children, it's often hard for children to consent. We think that this is rather intuitive. For example, children don't want to study. If we allow this because consent is something that is important, they just simply won't go to school. Or the fact that children would want to play games all day, do we still need to consent to take their game controller away so that they don't do this and actually study rather than waste their time? If they're trying to do this with the pill, they would simply have to ask for consent in everything that parents do. They don't prove why this pill is something that is uniquely necessary for this consent. Then why children can't meaningfully consent? First of all, know that they are immature. They don't understand the implications of certain things. They can't control their actions because there's brain chemicals that dictate how they act. There's impulses to maybe children that have violent impulses that feel when they're angry they have to punch someone, for example. This is something that might change when they become an adult. However, it's very difficult to control, and per our framing, these extreme cases are types when these medications is likely to be used, and therefore
think that they obviously can't consent. But second of all, note that they are likely to be short-termist. They can't think of the consequences of these actions. They can only see like the immediate benefit that is closest to them. For example, the fact that they want to skip school and play games, and therefore, even if the parent is going to go to them to say that you need to take this pill so that you go to school, they're obviously not going to say that that is something that is beneficial for me and therefore I will actually do it. And therefore, we think that all of this mechanism fills in the burden of why we can allow this like pill to be administered even without consent. But I'm going to further extend that in terms of the principle of why parents should actually be allowed to do this. I'm going to compare this with a lot of other actions that are allowed for like parents to do. First of all, note that parents are allowed the freedom to educate their children. They obviously do this without consent all the time. For example, the fact that they take away like the games or iPhones when kids are not studying, we think that this is simply the same comparative. The fact that you give this pill so that your children behave in a certain way. Second of all, note that parents often also direct children to be a certain way. This happens anyway. They shape the way that they think. They tell them that like you should go to the university, you should get a job, for example, and therefore we think that this is simply the same. Third of all, Lisa already explained how this massively benefits children. In terms of you actually getting an education in the first place, or you not becoming like a drug addict because you like grew up in the hoods and you're influenced by your friends, for example. The fact that you can actually like become an adult with like enough education is something that gives massive benefits to these children. We think that, and therefore we think parents should be allowed to do this. What this all means is this pill is just a toolbox amongst many that already exists, but is much more effective because in the status quo, you have no way to completely force your child to like be a certain way or like do a certain action. With this pill, you are actually able to do that. And we already explained the massive benefits and implications that has. Finally, in terms of another thing from just the final thing from OO, which is that like children are going to rebel. I think the example that they give already points to the fact that this is symmetric. In our world, we don't have the politeness pill, but anyway, Anyway, Yohe-san rebelled and like watched smartphones all the time. We think that that harm symmetrically exists, even on their side. Before I go on, I'll take, is there CO? UI? Nope, OO.
You told us that because the medicine is new, parents would hesitate to give it to them. Then what happens a year later?
Okay, you can elaborate on that. Finally, I'm going to talk about like social movements and like and children like and individuals being able to kind of like oppose like injustices that happen, which might be a potential case coming from CEO. Note that we think that it's rather more effective when we have this pill, or that like that individuals are influenced to behave like in a certain way, like with this pill. The first premise is that they can still feel like resentment, or they can still see like problems in society. We think that societally acceptable is more about the behavior rather than like a certain ideology. And therefore they're able to feel this and able to act upon this. But we think that it is going to be in a way that is like less kind of aggressive or like less confrontational, but rather kind of engage in like discussions, for example. So that's like one mechanism, the fact that you're ingrained like this good behavior, you're better able to kind of interact with people. So rather than like being simply like outright confrontational, we think that people are more likely to actually listen to you when they see that you're a good person. But second of all, we think that these pills can get rid of certain harmful stereotypes, which are often the causes of resentment. For example, the fact that the idea that Black people are like dangerous or associated with drugs or alcohol, or that or the fact that they commit crime more. We think that these are the things that lead to police brutality, or not interacting with people of a certain group. We think that we can rather fix that on our side, which leads to these people like not getting killed by the police, etc. But third of all, the fact that they can simply get an education because they're forced to go to school, we think that this is important. It increases your credibility, and you suffer less from poverty, which increases your capability to actually advocate for these things. So even on that point, we think it is much better on our side. Therefore, proud to.
Thanks. So DPM, DLO, here.
こう言ってますか？
はい。
ありがとうございます。Hi, my name is Yuki Ichikawa. Gender pronouns he, him. If you have any POIs, please POI via chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2. Saying that children wants to behave well in most instances is nothing but only the parents' egos we're happy to oppose. First, let me just clarify what we told you from our side of the house. We told you that children can consume these drugs, but only when one, children consent, but number two, when like medical professionals, for instance, certify that you should take the pill. That means that it is going to be extremely limited in most instances, but it's going to be significantly different from what OG has claimed. But second, we tell you that if they don't want to, like let's say, even if the medical professional says yes, you should take it, but if the child doesn't want to, then let be it, because it is better than screw up in the future. Note that what we told you is a long-term benefit or the long-term solution when they actually actively think that they should take the pill, not them being forced to take the pill without recognizing the actual benefits of taking the pill. First, their assumption on their side of the house that OG made today is like through education and etc., because they took the pill and they're going to behave well, they'll learn to be disciplined at the end of the day. First, even if that were to be the case, note that number one, because they don't understand or they don't intrinsically understand the merits of education or the merits of taking the pill, they're unlikely to continue what they have been doing, right? Because obviously, if they have been even if they think it's good, but if they were taking things for granted, they're very likely to think that this is nothing at the end of the day. They needed to prove why this education would actually make them intrinsically think that it's beneficial or intuitively think that it's beneficial. But number two, you think it's good when your personality is different, right? Note that when you take the pill, your personality changes significantly. Note that, yeah, sure, your actions are going to change, but it doesn't mean that your very own emotions are going to change significantly. What this means is, once you stop taking the pill because you do not recognize the benefits of taking that pill, you're very likely to think, why was I taking education? Or why was I doing all these things? It was bullshit. And at the end of the day, what Yohei-san pushes you is how children can intrinsically understand the benefits of taking the pill, which only exists uniquely on our side of the house. First, let me just explain to you why on the side of government, it will not be a last resort, but it will be something that parents will use without thinking much. First, parents have an incentive to make their children behave well. First, because these parents are humans after all, they care about social image. But two, they accumulate stress even if they love their children, right? What does this look like? Number one, note that, for example, most of these parents are busy, and when they're extremely stressed out, when they see that these pills are being glorified on social media and etc., these people who are stressed out and already irrational to a somewhat degree would be compelled to think that this is like a magical medicine or a magical pill that can make your children behave. What this means is, when you, or imagine a 4-year-old crying every day at the supermarket when you take them to the supermarket, for example, or you're going to be super stressed because whenever you ride the train, your children are crying out loud, doing whatever. You cannot make them get disciplined no matter how hard you try or no matter how many times you scold them. This is something that you have to consider on side government. OG blatantly state that parents are like perfect beings. We tell you that parents are humans. After all, they're going to be, or they want to make, at one point, they're going to be mentally stressed out to the extent where they're gonna think, I need to make them or make my children take the pill before I move on POI.
Yeah, so in that occasion, in your side of the house, anyway, parents gonna scold or try to educate your children. What's the difference?
Sorry, again? Oh, never mind. Okay. We tell you that at least if you're scolding these children, one, can at least exhaust your stress that you have, but number two, can acknowledge that what you're doing is bad. These children can intrinsically understand that what I have been doing was bad after all. I'll elaborate a bit more on this later on. What are the impacts that I told you about, parents being a bit lazy or irrationally making them children, or irrationally making these making your children take these pills because of the glorification of through social media and etc. Number one, children will grow up without knowing what not to do, and they're like, for example, their impulsive desire would just accumulate. For instance, like Yohei-san said, like playing smartphones or like having smartphones, playing games, but also you will not be scolded anymore on side of government. The implication here is, even if you were about to make a mistake in the future, you can't realize that you're like, going too far, for example, or because you do not recognize that all your actions were like right, quote unquote right, because you were taking the pill. Like if you're not, if you didn't consent to taking a pill, you're more likely to not just take all your actions for granted and never think that, I have been behaving or I have never been scolded because I took the pill. They would think, it's all because of all my, thanks to myself. Note that the development of like discipline or lise is because it is an imperative factor that will not exist on side government because it will never be scolded. It will take everything for granted. For instance, you might pickpocket or drink too much or like do something publicly inappropriate, take drugs and etc. What is the way here? Note that even on their side of the house, children might fuck up in the future after they become adults. But at least on our side of the house, these children are only going to make mistakes once they're in the childhood. Two, weighing. First, as Yohei-san said, capacity. They're more likely to access to extremely bad stuff through the internet. They're more likely to be exposed to bad stuff. They have more knowledge. They have more capacity, let's say financial, or the ability to walk around, etc., to do worse stuff. But second, they have higher incentives. Imagine hankoki. This is a very important mechanism coming from DLO. Note that if you have hankoki, you will learn how to like be independent from your parents and learn from mistakes that you will do. On government, when you do not have hankoki, and then what's going to happen is your feelings will accumulate, but your actions are going to be binded by your parents and the pill after all. Hence, it will probably come later at the adulthood, but it's going to be far worse because it's going to accumulate. First, note that hankoki is a part of human development that happens to the vast majority of people. This also means, importantly, that a lot of children in their life, at one point of their life, they're going to think, I want to rebel against my parents. I might want to do something that is socially unacceptable sometimes. That is like just human emotions that you have to fight. Note that this will build up if you just keep on taking the pill. And once you're going to be free, knowing that the benefits of taking the pill, they're more likely to fuck up once they become adulthood because they take the benefits of the pill for granted. Note that this only comes from not wanting to take the pill, not just come from logical reasons, but just intent on it, like irrational emotions. Note that because these parents are forcibly giving it on their side of the house. This occurs even if one's consuming the pill as well. The impact here is, note that they're going to be their like inflated impulses will burst out at the end of the day. They will not be able to stop this emotion because they still do not know that all their actions are not justified because they're not taking the pills anymore. But second, government cannot assume that this impulse will disappear just because they're going to grow up. It's very likely they will accumulate. But thirdly, at least on our side of the house, children can acknowledge the benefits of the pill if they're fucking up, because they intrinsically acknowledge the benefits of the pill. They're more likely to consume the pills after they become adults. For all these reasons, we're extremely happy to oppose.
Thank you very much, MG.
Be cured. Can you hear me? Okay, all right, lovely. I'm gonna prefer POIs vocally, preferably by OO. If OO's trade-off is that you will spend more time playing games in the future, we are happy to take that, because on our side, at least we're able to prevent underage drinking and going to juvenile prison. If the trade-off is you end up playing Valorant more, we don't mind. I want to quickly kick out the independent case coming from OO, which was this whole idea that after you consume the pill, you're likely to engage in more rebellious acts. There are two structural failures with this. One, it's likely that these pills, even if it's short-term impacts, is likely to help you adopt intellectual habits and legal coping mechanisms in the long term. That means that over time, you're more biologically likely to continue living in a good way, because that's the kind of way and social norm that you're going to be necessarily used to, because you're going to be living this habitual life throughout this pill. So therefore, it's unlikely that suddenly, just because you stop using the pill, you're going to randomly have a desire to drink 10 beers a day, precisely because that is a reality that you've never actually experienced in this life experience of this pill. But secondly, the problem with opposition stance, which was this whole idea that you should at least experience rebellious acts as a young person, is that the vast majority of rebellious acts as a juvenile have irreversible consequences. Things like taking drugs can literally lead to your death. Things like underage drinking often goes unreported because juveniles are so scared of, for instance, legal repercussions that they often do not go to the doctors in the first place. And that's why, at least as an adult, when you're more physically and mentally mature, at least you're able to do that. So our case is that hankoki as an adult is fine because our goal is to educate children to learn that these overdosing on drugs is bad. Too much time on social media is bad, so they don't do it when they're in a particularly vulnerable state of childhood. Once they have internalized this information and formulated preferences throughout this pill, we believe it's their right to do what they want to do. Therefore, we think this is very necessarily on principally consistent with the status quo. That's why we have things like laws, making sure there are things like age restrictions for these things. The first thing then I want to talk about is opposition's principle that this is likely to be coercive and this is justified. As long as we're able to prove that parents have a moral right to do this, this is independently round winning because no matter the potential harm this pill has, if we prove that parents have a moral legitimacy in imposing this pill, this overweighs any kind of harm opposition talks about. And I just want to point out this intuition pump here. It's like things like vaccines where we let parents decide to let their children take it even if the side effects are still morally unclear. There are two things in terms of mitigation first. One, we already allow parents to have massive amounts of control over their children in the status quo. We allow them to, for instance, inject chemicals like vaccines into their children. We allow them to choose what kind of country they're going to grow up into or language. But that critically means that opposition has a unique burden to prove why uniquely this pill is different from all the other types of impositions that the parents do. Secondly, children are structurally poorly equipped to make the best possible decisions for themselves because they're subject to, for instance, extreme social and peer pressure. They live in this small world where they don't understand the consequences of their actions. That means, therefore, the parents are often the best actors and being legitimate in acting in a paternalistic manner to look out for the best interests of their children. On O's world, according to the logic, if a child is scared of getting injected with a needle for any flu shot, they won't let that child take it, and they are letting that children face the potential consequences of these infectious diseases. At least on our side, we have a better moral higher authority that is able to look out for the objective good for that children. They need to engage with that kind of scenario. But secondly, I'm going to be more ambitious with this claim. I'm going to argue that this pill uniquely increases the agency of children in two ways. One, it's the fact that most children in the status quo don't want to be disobedient, but they are forced to be so because they feel like that's the only way to survive this broken world. This pill is a counterbalancing way for them to regain choice in this broken world, especially because they don't have to go to, for instance, gang culture or not being able to go to your school because all your friends are doing that and you think it's cool to be kind of a juvenile and doing drugs. So uniquely, we actually increase the natural agency of children to actually be obedient and follow the social order. But secondly, even if this measure does restrict the agency of the child in the short term, this is still a legitimate choice because we're able to prove that this maximizes the long-term outcomes for this child since the child is likely to have more choice in the future. For instance, it's the fact that when you prevent going to, for instance, juvenile prison, you have so much more job opportunities or potentials to go to universities. On balance, we prevent the kind of short-term negative externalities that happen. But lastly, let's assume this is an unjust moral imposition of this parent. When students act in harmful, toxic ways, there's negative externalities. They bully other students. They pressure other students. These other students didn't consent to this harm being done on them. That means that at least this pill is a legitimate counterbalancing force for these other vulnerable, innocent children to having this harm imposed on them. So the weighing here is that on balance, we save more children that are non-consensually being harmed by the problematic acts of this specific children, and therefore we already proved to you that even just in terms of principle, we win. But the second half of my speech, irregardless of this principle, is still why pragmatically there's still likely to be better forms of parenting and better for the children. The first thing then is why this likely results in better parenting. There are three structural reasons. One is that this forces parents to become better parents and take accountability, i.e. that most parents, for instance, blame the faults of children on exogenous variables, like simply saying that my child had a simply flawed personality trait, or they often deflect by saying he's just problematic. At least throughout this pill, this forces parents to not be able to accuse these things and characteristic traits, but necessarily actually engaging with the intrinsic characters of their child by taking this pill. But secondly, when children become more obedient, more polite, that means that other authorities like their teachers, who are often public servants that are underpaid, will now optically understand children are putting in more work, so it more likely incentivizes you to actually put in more effort to help out the child get into education and better your grades. But thirdly, it's the fact that when parents ill, they're likely to be less overwhelmed by the many issues their children are facing, so it's easier to focus on more specific and targeted issues like possible mental health conditions. I'll take OO.
even if the worst case scenario is not going to be solved in either side of the house, at least we already told you that the parents are going to use this kind of drug, even in the cases that the alternative method exists in the first place.
Okay, one, I don't care if that happens because it's still on balance good. The only harm you said is they might play video games later on. I don't see why that's a big issue. But the last thing here is on the macro level. A lot of structural deficiencies in educational systems are blamed on individual faults. Things like African American communities are said to be underfunded because politicians just say they don't have a good work ethic. But at least through this pill, when you channel in these group of obedient students people, it's much more easier to justify providing resources to these underserved communities. And that's the actual counterfactual that opposition needs to engage in. The last thing I want to talk about is why this is better outcomes for children. One, we already told you this forces children to develop good habits in the long term that become internalized, so it's unlikely they become rebellious. Secondly, this prevents children from falling into, for instance, unprotected sex, or they're likely to stay out of the prison to poverty pipeline, so it protects the long-term prospects of them. And lastly, even if you don't take the pill, at least one, you invite massive amounts of discourse around the harms that many children face when they grow up in these families without support, so you increase the political capital to help children. But secondly, it also teaches children to be preemptively obedient so they can prevent having to take the pill. So overall, we get a sustainable, consensual, good population of obedient children, and we fix the biggest harm that OO pushes to. For any kind of reason, principle or pragmatic, I've never been so proud to propose.
Thank you. So, closing member opposition.
Am I audible? 聞こえますか?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, folks. I'll probably take diagonal OG. Chat. Thanks. Okay. Opening debate is really, really weird, and I'm going to point out why, right? The first thing, there's two things OG tries to push to. One, they basically say, oh, parents are going to be super responsible actors and parents are going to be like super careful when using this pill. Like three things here. One, parents aren't that rational, right? Lots of parents can be neglectful, abuse. I'm not going to go into the itty bitty cookie cutters of like why some parents are evil. I think that's intuitive. But even not neglectful parents aren't really rational in the sense that they aren't the best actor or best judge to, you know, like accurately assess the situation or like be able to administer the pill, like be able to administer the pill in like the most appropriate situations, right? So basically OG's characterization is really, really heavily reliant on the idea that one, parents are always non-malicious actors that will always look out for their kids, which we know is not true based on all the domestic abuse and all the terrible things that happen in households. But two, note that, you know, like even in real life where parents are trying, even for the parents that are trying to be cognizant about medication, they fuck it up all the time, right? That's why, you know, things like parents like misplacing like antidepressants or their medication for their kids happen all the time, right? Giving parents, this can't be justification to give parents autonomy over administering this sort of pill for their kids in the get-go, right? And then there's a weird tension within their arguments where they're like, oh, the kids will accept the pill because they have a motivation to make parents proud. But at the same time, they're uncontrollable, so they need the pill. Like, which is it is really unclear. And the second thing is like, they're like, oh, you know, like kids will become more educated and they'll be able to climb like the social ladder or whatever. I'm not sure you can seriously suggest capitalistic poverty cycles or like living in the hoods is a product of being impolite, right? Most likely it's a product of very ingrained like structural obstacles and reasons that these people have to come over. But yeah, for a moment, let's pretend it is. Now that you've taken the pill, how are you going to overcome it? How are you going to like overcome structural poverty just because you're socially more acceptable now? I don't see the linkage there between that impact. And then we have you know, like knife. Let's go knifing time. Fuck your stance, Yohei. One, he says consent. Really, dude, you've debated hundreds of domestic abuse motions. Like, really? Affirmative consent with kids? Isn't this like banging an old drum? Are you really suggesting to me that kids can somehow affirmatively consent to some medication? Why do we not allow kids to have relationships with adults? Why do we not allow kids alcohol? Why do we not allow them to vote? Right? Like, I don't need to go on the hundreds and thousands of cookie cutter mechanisms of why kids are fucking stupid and why you don't allow them to do like all kinds of things. But second of all, note that they're really taking a soft ass stance. They're like, oh, you know, like we're gonna go to the hospital and like if these kids like consent, we're gonna administer the pill to them and so on. There's no difference with this and what Lisa is saying, which is basically like parents trying to like convince their kids like in a good way to get the pill in the first place, right? It's not like Lisa is saying that we're gonna like jam people's throats and like shove the pill down their throat. Of course, there's going to be some level of coercion and persuasion under OG's paradigm as well. I don't really see where OO is trying to edge into this debate, but basically their stance is like no palpable difference, right? And then Aoki tries to sort of salvage it by saying two things. Like he says like, oh, impoliteness is limited. Like, again, are we serious? Like Senna already like rips this apart by talking about all the damage kids can do. It really depends on what kid you're talking about, right? And if like the genius checks and balances about like shonen, what Japanese people call it? Like shonenin or whatever worked, we wouldn't have kids committing crimes in the first place, right? So like opening debate is just weird cherry picking. They basically cherry pick their stakeholders. They basically cherry pick their characterizations. There's no real like substantive analysis of like the implications of this technology. Senna is sort of the only person that makes sense in this round. He says that, oh, kids fucking suck. So let's biologically attune them to good behavior. 100% agree. The only thing I'm slightly against here is the suggestion of stopping taking the pill because adults are fucking stupid as well and do all kinds of weird shit. So this is how I'm going to approach the debate. Since CAP was really clear that this pill has no drawbacks, it's magical, it's polite, yeah, we oppose allowing parents or giving parents the choice whether to administer the pill or not. In fact, let's feed everybody the pill at all times. I'm gonna state mandate this motherfucking shit and just keep like mass produce the pill and put it in the water system. Put it in there. I mean, I'm living in Japan anyway, where everybody's practically on the politeness pill anyway. Might as well not have assholes on the street, right? Like, basically, like CEO wants to basically just give everybody the pill at all times. It's illegal for you to not consume the pill and not be on the pill. And, you know, if there's a state that resists, we're more than happy to invade it and feed them the pill as well. Great, right? Why is this great? One, this ends all racism and sexism because racism and sexism are, surprise, surprise, socially unacceptable behaviors. Things like microaggressions are gone. Things like people being an asshole to you are gone. Things like people screaming at me that I'm a Korean cockroach in the streets of Shinjuku are gone. And if the trade-off is like the lack of a little personality or that the world is slightly gray, yes, fine, I'll take that trade-off. Things like sexual assault are gone. The innate harm human beings, the self-destruction the human race wreaks upon itself is all gone. So let's not allow parents to have this choice. Let's feed the pill to the parents too. Let's feed it to the kids. Let's feed it to fucking everybody, right? Like, what are the drawbacks of this magical pill? Before going on, POIs from OG, anyone? CG?
Sure. So the motion isn't like regardless of what you're saying, it's not about whether parents should take it as well. It's just specifically for children. So for specifically for children, do you already concede that it's better for children to have to take
100%. It's 100% good for children now, right? I'm basically opposing that we're allowing parents a choice on whether to feed them. We're gonna force these things into their mouths. Like 100% concede that it's good for parents, good for everybody, right? I don't see a palpable harm to this bill. In fact, I was thinking that maybe opposition, the best op can say is like, oh, the lack of creativity or like the lack of personality is so detrimental to our social circles. But I'll take that any day. I'll take that trade-off any day if people can be just less assholes to each other, right? I think at the end of the day, all of us here are living in a debate bubble where we keep thinking that, oh, we're the best thing about socially unacceptable behavior we can think of is like drinking when you're young. I started drinking when I was in high school, so I guess I'm socially unacceptable. But or riding a motorbike when you're a chugakusei. Like socially unacceptable behaviors are batshit crazy, like Senna points out. It's just there's all kinds of like weird ass socially unacceptable behaviors that traumatize us and that fuck our psychology up for like years to come. There's multiple stupid choices you can make, regardless of whether you're a baby, you're a kid, or an adult. So I don't understand if we have this technology available and gov fiat is that we can mass produce it cheaply and it's super fucking transparent and everyone has access to it, why you can't just feed it to everybody? I don't see the drawback of it. And if we're going to feed it to everybody, why don't we just like force feed it to everybody, thereby effectively opposing the motion that we're allowing these people a choice on whether to take it or not? Problem solved. It's world peace. There's no more wars anymore. Putin isn't an asshole, and it's very socially unacceptable to invade Ukraine. So we don't have that anymore. So I think we just saved the world, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So couple of here.
Okay, so I hope I'm audible. If you have any POIs, please put it in the chat box. Please do not vocalize. Pronouns he, him, or they, them. So starting in 3, 2, 1. Let's briefly just engage with the case, the very interesting case coming from closing opposition. I think what they have told us is that they're gonna force everyone, including adults, to take that pill in the first place. Well, that's an interesting idea, but whether parents should take it is a totally different debate in the first place. The extent we need to affirm is that to say that whether we should like have the children take that pill without the consent of them in the first place. I think they're just debating another round, so I think they cannot obviously get first in this round in the first place. But secondly, I think also the mechanisms were very like kind of lots of they need lots of mechanisms to explain that. For example, like just because that people just like simply take the politeness pill, it doesn't mean that like everyone will stop having wars, because like anyway people have economic incentives or geopolitical incentives, or they are still have national identities, whatever. I think all of these mechanisms weren't filled. I think it seems to be a gigantic impact, but actually does not happen anyway in the first place. So I think CO is out of the debate. Moving on to engagement to the opening opposition. So I think that there were mainly two pushes coming from the opening opposition. The first one was to say that like actually children won't be actually behaving better in the future, and secondly talking about how parents are actually stupid and we should not give the choice and actually like have the children consent. As also member of opposition highlighted, I think letting children have active consent is a very ridiculous idea, because like as I think all themselves also concede, these children are anyway immature, and they do not necessarily understand the consequences of what is actually good and for them in the first place. I think that idea is kind of a very kind of unrealistic in the first place. But anyway, moving on to engagement on like why these children are likely to cultivate good behaviors in our side of the house. Mainly three things to say. Firstly, I think like this a simple intuition pump here is that like even if you're scolded by your parent to say that you shouldn't punch other people, it does not necessarily mean that you're gonna punch everyone like when you become adult in the first place. I think that won't be done by majority of people in the first place. But secondly, I think this is just a pill. We're not saying that we're gonna like for example like have a surgery and like lose their consciousness or whatever. So actually, you still recognize what you're doing at the moment. You're still conscious on like your actions and behaviors and the consequences of that. So I think this mechanism specifically leads to like people get used to that kind of behavior. Also, like for example, like oftentimes you're praised by your parents or teachers for taking that specific behavior. I think regardless of like whether you actually want to take that action at the moment, I think when you become praised or when you become socially approved by taking that particular action, I think you'll be more willing to take that particular action later on in the first place. POI 後で取ります。Okay. Then the third piece of refutation I'd like to make here is that I think the problem of rebellion is actually symmetric in either side of the house, because like I think the major way to educate children in their side of the house will be, for example, to like educate or scold children. But I think when these children are anyway like rebellious to that extent, I think they cannot in their side of the house, they cannot make children obey to like certain direction in the first place. I think in our side of the house it is far more better, because like we can, regardless of like whether children actually want to follow the direction of the parents or not, we can forcibly like make them follow the directions or follow the good behaviors which society perceives. I think that thing is far more better than their side of the house. Moving on to explanation on like parents being like stupid or whatever. I think the DLO pushed to say that like parents are like stressed and like they're gonna easily use it. But I think there was no problem in the first place, because as I already told you, I think just children making good behaviors is not of a problem in the first place. But secondly, I think if they're gonna say that is a specific problem, I think scolding children or like educating children itself should be also recognized as a problem. So I think they cannot like actually meaningfully oppose this motion by saying that. Thirdly, I think they said that, I think also opening opposition, they suggested that parents are not best actors. But I think in that case, in that specific case, I think we should let the parents take children the pill in the first place. Because like when parents are actually bad actors, when they let them educate by themselves actively, for example, let's say scold or educate, I think that's far more worse because like they are likely to, for example, engage in abuse or abuse or whatever. I think letting them follow the directions given by the pill to say that, for example, like just like following socially good values like attending schools or like not engaging in bad behaviors, whatever. I think that is far more better way to educate. Pill is a better educator than the fucking parent anyway in the first place. Before moving on to the engagement, the comparison with opening government, yes, Owo.
Children going to the juvenile prison is rather good because they can get some rehabilitation for the professional, and the benefit of the rehabilitation is not only temporary but also a long run.
Firstly, you do not necessarily have to go through that process in the first place. As my partner already suggested, these consequences are irreversible. You have criminal records. You won't be hired by companies. You won't be accepted into like workplace. I think that's a huge impact. That's the most large impact we need to prevent. Secondly, we can just like let them take the pill and learn and adapt and get used to that particular good behavior. I think children can just like internalize that good thing and behave well. I think that's a far more easier and costless way to do that. Comparison with opening government, I mainly have two things to say. Like, firstly, I think opening government did a fairly good job of explaining like how these children are gonna like behave in our side of the house. But firstly, I think they lack the mechanization on like how these children are gonna actually internalize those good behaviors. They just suggested that like children will do good things and so forth, but they lack the mechanization on like why actually children are likely to internalize that good behavior even for the future. I think they did not necessarily respond to the always push. I think that's what is done uniquely by my partner. But secondly, I think we have proved the benefit on a more societal level, given that like not necessarily all parents are gonna have their children take this pill. I think my partner uniquely proved to us like how on a societal level people are likely to behave. Children are likely to behave better because like there's due to the like increasing number of people taking this pill. I think we have shown more massive benefits. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much. Wait, here.
問いがあったら please write on chat and he can pronounce. So my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Today's opening opposition talked about how basically children can make a consent, but it was quite weird for me and difficult to understand this point because on one hand, they talked about how parents are abusive and irrational to the degree that they are likely to overuse, for example, like pills or misunderstand the usage of pills. But on the other hand, they talked about how children are rational to the degree that they can make an affirmative consent, or to the degree that they can understand about the actual consequences, or maybe the implication further by taking the pills or not by taking the pills. We think that completely does not make sense. When they knowingly carry out the delinquency but actually take a pill. We think rather closing opposition was better engaging to opening government's characterization or maybe the setup that there's massively accessible drugs around there, that we basically all households have access to these sorts of pills, but also there might be true that there might be some backlashes by forcing every single household, but we think that these individuals can get accustomed to this policy insofar as this is a basic consensus that this is basically good for parents because they can reduce the delinquency of their children as well. We think there will be no much backlashes as well. We think that is natural things that can uniquely happen on closing opposition. So first of all, talking about opening government, they talked about how parents are likely to have a better usage of these pills. One, we think, as Lee has pointed out, we think that is quite assertive and speculative whether or not every single parent are likely to be rational, or maybe they can do calculus whether or not this is beneficial or not. We think sometimes parents fuck up. For example, like parents as well are likely to be addicted by some sort of drugs, or maybe some parents believe in anti-scientific sort of like approaches from religious grounds. We think there are some cases where parents are unlikely to make a practical calculus in terms of consequences that children are likely to face. We think anyway these parents are likely to fuck up. But second of all is that it is quite assertive. Even if that was not to be the case, we think in vast majority of cases, in some cases, parents are unlikely to take the pill for several reasons. A is that parents want to self-recognize that they are good at parenting. They do not want to self-admit by themselves by giving children the pill that they are not good at parenting. They want to show around to other like neighbors or maybe communities that they are still have enough capacity to parent their children by themselves. But B is that as like OG have characterized, there are some sort of unknown like riskiness of these pills, so that there are likely to be some disconnection between the society and these scientific like pills and so on. And third of all is that even if all characterization from OG was true, we think this is likely to be at best reactive. What does it mean? What do I mean by this? Is that these parents are likely to give the pill after, for example, like some accidents happening or after like turning out that their children were actually getting involved in some sort of bullying or maybe crimes. We think that is a moment that parents have massive incentive to give their pills. But the counterfactual on closing opposition was though regardless of the consequences or maybe the accidents that children are likely to face, they are unconditionally forced to be given with this pill. We think likely case scenario is that there'll be no incidents or maybe this pills can proactively prevent these sort of criminal cases or maybe accidents happening. We think that is the basic reason why this is quite unique to forcing these children to take the pill. And also several mechanization on why allowing is not enough in some sort of cases. A is that there are some like societal chilling effect if the OG's characterization was true. For example, there might be fear towards the unknown substances getting into your bodies, or maybe there may be a collective action problem that some minorities are likely to be risk averse, so that they are unlikely to follow the majority of decisions, or maybe there can be some sort of like distrust among the society that human rights organizations are likely to strictly regulate these sort of like actions and so on. There might be some sort of like disconnection within this society. So like closing opposition was unique to say that all like households are likely to buy into this sort of pills. So next of all, I would like to move on to closing government. I completely agree with the benefit that CG talked about. For example, like it maximizes the agency of children. It creates political mobility that politicians that have more incentive to cater to relatively underprivileged schools, maybe parents getting better accountable by showing the obedience of children. I agree with all of these benefits, but the things lacking was, as well as like opening government, was how like parents are capable to decide whether or not like this pill is effective. Maybe there are some sort of alternatives existing in the society. We think that was quite unclear at the end of closing government as well. And also there are independent responses from whip speaker that this like stopping the war is something extreme and that is unlikely to happen. But we think this is still likely for several reasons. A is that like war in itself is something also geopolitical, but also purely done by some sort of populistic incentive. For example, like racism taking places in several areas. Maybe there are religious reasons that they actively try to kill someone. We think at least we can prevent people being killed, and we think that is fundamentally good because both like government side concedes that agency of individual is very important. We should maximize the number of agencies as well, so that there'll be more like happinesses or maybe pursuit of happiness as well. We think that's fundamentally good as well. I'll take the point from Lisa-san.
We already gave you from OG the principal argument of why giving this to children is justified. What is your principal justification of force feeding this to every single human being?
One, we would like to note that this is pragmatically good for parents as well, given that these parents are also willing to give these children with like pills. So we think that is basically good. There'll be no massive backlashes or maybe principal culpability to say that. But second of all, even if that was not to be the case, we think government has massive like sort of authority or maybe justification to force these individuals to take this pill. For example, like politicians are qualified because of the democratic process that validated this politician to make a policy. We think that is quite assertive to say that the government has no like justification. Rather, we say in this democratic society where people agree upon these policies, maybe there are like socially constructed consent that these people reside in this society. We think that is still justifiable for us to force every individual, as for example, driving licenses, maybe forcing individual to put a seatbelt while driving. We think that is still intuitive to believe in this way, and this is the reason why we win this debate. Thank you.
Thank you.